Welcome to Animind, an anime podcast where we nerd out about all things anime and dive deeply into the storytelling art form while dissecting the psychological aspects that it speaks to. I'm your co-host, Matthew Basil.
I'm your co-host, Danny Ari.
And I'm your co-host, Graham Pugh.
All right, so this is episode 10 of Animind, and we will be discussing the 1988 movie Grave of the Fireflies, which is a World War II movie, basically, out of Japan, anime movie, that is very heavy. I don't know if we want to, I don't know if it's quite as heavy as Perfect Blue, but I feel like we should maybe put a warning at the beginning of this
heavy
episode.
In another way. It's definitely heavy in a whole other way.
It's got kids who are refugees of war. Just because it's kids, if nothing else, I'd say it makes it a little bit heavier.
Yeah, and there's also, there's death, there's blood, there's true heavy war themes, like all of those types of things are in there. There's starvation, there's
bombs, obviously.
Yeah, there's a wartime.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll put a little bit of a disclaimer here that if you're triggered by like war movies or like heavy topics of malnutrition and stuff like that and war scars, I would steer clear of this movie. This movie is pretty gut punch emotional. So you might want to.
It's definitely not what you would think of when you hear Studio Ghibli.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Which actually, now that disclaimer's out there, I guess we'll, mention the kind of interesting thing is that this was one of the first movies coming out of Studio Ghibli, I think, and it was kind of the third movie. There you go. Graham gave me a 3.
Second or third, because it came out at the same time as My Neighbor Totoro. So, like, the first one was Castle in the Sky, and then in 1986, I think, and then it was these two came out simultaneously or very close together.
Right, and it was originally they wanted to release Grave of the Fireflies. They wanted to release My Neighbor Totoro no one wanted to give backing for it. They didn't think it was going to be successful, so they got this novel called Grave. I think it's called Grave of Fireflies. It's a novel written by Yuki Nosaka, who actually based it on his real life experiences and the novel as a therapeutic thing of his experiences during the war. And they decided to adapt it as Grave of the Fireflies, an animated movie that would be more educational and historical, because it would be about the war, and would hope that they tailored it with a double feature with My Neighbor Totoro. So they made the two concurrently, hoping that Grave of the Fireflies would attract people to My Neighbor Totoro, and so they could make both movies because they wanted to make My Neighbor Totoro. And instead, everyone loved My Neighbor Totoro and felt so good after My Neighbor Totoro that they left the theater and they didn't want to watch Grave of the Fireflies. So Too heavy, exactly. So Grave of the Fireflies wasn't really very much of a commercial success, and kind of failed. But My Neighbor Totoro became the huge hit, and it's like the icon for Studio Ghibli.
which is ironic considering that even now, Grave of the Fireflies has been acclaimed as one of the best World War II, like realistically shown movies that's come out at all, let alone animated.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I agree with Roger Ebert, who calls it one of the best and most powerful war films of all time. Even though the director insists that it's not a war film, the director, Isao, there you go, say it.
Isao Takahata.
There you go. Yeah, he insists it's not a war film. He insists it's about young people being estranged from society and then kind of failing in life, and it's supposed to be a look at that, just set during the war. But I think it was a powerful war film. I don't know what you two thought.
You mentioned it being really grounded, and one thing about it that is related to that is my dad's best friend's wife, who is basically my godmother, who was Japanese and is the one who got me into Studio Ghibli and into anime as a whole. She says it's very, like, I think she tries to watch this movie as little as possible because it makes her very depressed because the conditions that her dad lived in were really close to how the main characters of this movie lived, like growing up in like World War II era Japan, being like a young boy around that age or a little younger.
So going from there, this movie follows these two kids around from the beginning, and I guess this is spoiler territory, but the whole movie is the first scene you see, the first words are September 21st, 1945 is the day that I died. And that's Seika, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but that's the main character speaking. And throughout the film, I actually love how this was done. You can tell by the colors used. He's like rose colored, and him and his sister, who are also, they're both rose colored, follows almost as like guardian angels, rewatching his journey from the time he's basically evacuated from his home as fire fights are happening, like fire raids are burning up his city. And the only way that you're able to tell is by the color of the lens used for the characters, which one is the real current character and which one is the ghost. So it's kind of wild that you find out from the beginning, oh, these people died. So it kind of helps the hurt later.
And kind of the lighting and coloring that they use for showcasing, oh, no, here's them, their ghosts, like, after the events of the story.
The fireflies and the glowing.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's like the glow and coloring of, like, fireflies, and that, I think, was very well done.
Plus, when you watch it again, as I kind of went through it again after the initial shock of the movie, I think it's also kind of symbolic, the rose-colored, because, you know, it's ideal, the afterlife, the peacefulness, the I don't have to stress about wartime anymore. It's rose-colored, like the ghosts are, and I don't know, I think that's really cool. It was really well done. Confusing at first, but once you get the idea, you're good.
And it's one of the other things about the coloring and the artistic element to this, because we discuss the artistic element of anime as well on the show, as well as psychological themes, is that the outlines in most of the movie were all done as in brown instead of when most outlines are done in black.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, and they it was the first anime actually to use brown outlines, which are difficult because black contrasts more. They did it on a challenge basically, and they did it to see if they could do it because they felt that it would give it a kind of softer feel, which I think it does kind of have.
It's almost sepia-ish. That does make sense now that I'm thinking about it actively.
Yeah, it had that, and I didn't even know because I did the research after I watched the movie, so I didn't spoil anything. Although, like you said, they kind of telegraph what's going to happen from the first 5-10 minutes. But but once I read that afterwards, I was like, oh, okay, because it did kind of have this very, like you said, kind of euphoric, ethereal feel to the whole thing that made it very like soft. I got what they meant by the softness of it, that there was something soft about it, even though it was so hard what was being shown on screen, there was still a softness to it.
That artistic conflict, I believe, is what makes it so interesting to me. And I didn't even think about it. I was just kind of thinking about, as I was watching, I'm like, why does this seem so gentle? Like, the storytelling of it just seems so like sepia, and what you would think of is like, oh, like soft memories, but what they're explaining and what's happening is so dark. Dead bodies, burned up people, blood, like it's rough.
Bye, Mom.
No, I know, and that's a whole other thing I want to get into in a little bit. But one more thing that really caught my eye, because I don't think I've ever seen an animated anything do it as well as they did was the ashes in the air. Like the ash burning up in the air as it fell. So like you'd see embers flying in most animes, sure, but you could actually see the pieces of like charred things falling from the sky and burning up and turning into nothing as they were falling. And that was just, I was so caught off guard by that I actually had to rewind it because I wasn't listening, or I guess reading the subtitles, because I was just so caught up in the art. It was really beautiful. Considering all this dark crap is going on, I think that was my favorite artistic point in the whole movie.
Yeah, it's a shame because at least, I mean, I know Danny, you had trouble with it too. I don't know if because I know you have I think a hard copy, Graham, so I don't know if that was able to be dubbed. But I mean, I know there's, in the anime community, I know some people prefer subtitles, some people prefer dub. This was a movie that I think would really benefit from, at least watching it at least once dubbed, because it was just, like you said, those embers and that slow kind of feel that they had to a lot of the scenes was just so beautiful to watch. The Firefly scene was another scene that was, I think, very beautiful.
Yes.
Done. When they're in the woods and they catch the fireflies. There's, several scenes with fireflies. And so it would have been nice to just take that in without having to even worry about the subtitles, just purely, even though I think most of the firefly scenes are silent, but still, yeah, it was, and another thing with the art was, I thought, which, I mean, I guess isn't technically a spoiler because it's, again, the first like 10, 15 minutes, but there's a burn victim, because of the bombing that occurs. That's how the movie starts, with this bombing. There's a burn victim they find. And I just thought, I was aghast when they showed her, because the injuries and like the way she was, I'm like, wow, like this is, I mean, this is what like a burn victim would look like. I mean, it's still animation, but it was like, I was like, wow, okay,
blistered, shriveled, swollen,
yes, the lips being like how they were crusted and chapped, and I was
even
like,
my roommate was like, holy crap, they did that, and I was like, yup.
Yeah, I had your roommate's reaction when I saw it. I was like, wow, okay, this is like, okay, I mean, it's like, it's animation, but this is like as realistic as you can do it in animation. I mean, it made it actually look almost more realistic than you see in a lot of like action movies and stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, live action.
Oh, absolutely.
I think the fact that it's contrasted so strongly by kind of the cuter animation of the main characters and how they're not like as realistically proportioned and drawn and everything, and then you just get this visceral image of a burn victim. I think that like punctuates the intensity even more. It's like, oh my god.
Oh yeah, definitely. Even up until that point, you see burned up victims, like ashes. You see entire cities leveled. You just see all this already. But you're not used to in anime seeing the realistic, like, even like Attack on Titan, like it's so animated and so like, you know what I mean? Animated like to that degree where you would be like, oh yeah, this doesn't look anything like what a realistically torn apart person looks like, And then you see this person that's just burned up, bandaged up, and what you can see of them is messed up. Like, I think that's what's so shocking, because especially for people who have watched hundreds of animes, hundreds of animated things, that you don't expect that. I thought that was intense. And then one more thing about the art that I really appreciated was the last scene. Just because you don't expect it. You're seeing kind of the ghost of the main character and his sister kind of following his past journey. And he's kind of in the background, and you're seeing all this simultaneously. And then the last scene, I'm not going to give away that scene because it's so beautiful, but it just shows him looking over this cityscape, like this present day town or city, and it juxtaposes the rest of the film, because you're so used to seeing all of this 1945 wooden homes and all of that. So the lighting and the glow, it's ethereal. It's beautiful.
I think one reason why that in particular was included was because the director Isao Takahata, I think part of why he specifically chose this to make a movie about was because from what I remember reading, it was like he was scared that young people were becoming so distanced from Japan's fairly recent past that they were like, hey, you need to understand what our generation went through and just how bad things were and understand how much better things are. So the fact that he's looking over like the modern day city where it's like, it wasn't that long ago, these two different points in time especially conveys that. When he turns, it looks like he's looking right at you as if like, hey, yeah, this sucked and
This
like,
sucked, but it happened.
Yeah, and the movie's like message was, hey, young people, things that weren't always this cushy. It wasn't that long ago where we had it really hard.
That's a great transition into like the next thing I kind of wanted to talk about was the fact that if you're watching a movie that says, I died on September 21st, 1945, and you're a history person and find the World War II stuff just fascinating, not in like a dark way, but just the way that history is and how we learn from history and the things that have happened, and to not ignore that. When you think of September 21st, 1945, you're like, that's over a month after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Like, these are things that happen. So are we going to see this? It was hard for me. I was talking about this before we started recording, but the fact that you can't really tell the timing of, and I think that's the point. Because the importance isn't the bombs. The importance isn't the nuclear part of it. The importance is, that's, I guess, where I can see this isn't a war film in his perspective, because it's about siblings who try to make ends meet. And as you find out in the first 10 minutes, they don't make it because it's just so tough having no one and nothing and surviving wartime. Because wartime is hard enough, as you see, like, juxtaposing with his aunt and the neighbors, and just, you see all these other people who get by just fine, but it's not about them. It's about the kids. And so you're left wondering, oh, when's the bomb thing going to happen? When's this timing at? You know, I was watching this with my roommate, and he goes, you know, the fire raids, the fire bombs coming down is what destroyed a lot of Japan in this time, because everything was made out of wood in this era, and entire cities were made out of wood. So it didn't take an entire nuclear bomb. And I think that's what, I don't want to get my personal beliefs into this, but I think that's what's cruel, is that these are just people. These are just civilians. And like, you're not even using weapons to kill military. You're just trying to wreck their homes. And that's messed up. But anyway.
Now, wait a minute, Danny. I don't think you want to be so controversial as to say that atomic weapons shouldn't be used on people.
Oh, I never.
I don't know about that.
You want to start a fight. You want to start a fight. This is not the place, sir.
I think that it's perfectly fine to do that to innocent people. Just kidding. Totally
Don't
kidding.
you gaslight me right now. Anyway, my point is, we were trying to figure out the timeline of the film, and we were just like, it doesn't say. Did the bomb? We actually thought the bombs had dropped because the main character goes, like after his family's home is destroyed by fire, he's like, so this is black rain. And if you know what black rain is, it's fallout induced rain that's poisonous. So you're thinking, so the bomb already happened. So that threw me off for a quick minute. And then, I don't know why I'm laughing, because this is such a dark film. But the fact that you're watching this and you're like, all of this chaos is happening and it has nothing to do with the nuclear bombs. Like, all of this chaos and destruction and horrible stuff happened before any of those bombs even happened. And they kind of even gloss over it. You find out later, they're like, we'll go to the beach when summer comes. It's not even July yet. All this chaos happens. All these people are dying before the bombs are even dropped. And once you realize that, you're like, oh, crap. Like, this is intense, because they just completely do like a time jump over that. They're like, yeah, the war's over now. I'm like, what?
Yeah, they just say
You're like, we
at one point.
lost.
Yeah, they're like, "Oh, did you hear the war's over?" And the main character is like, "Wait, what?" And they're just like, they just kind of throw it out there. "Oh yeah, the war's over." So they don't.
There's no
explicitly
troops left alive, by the way.
Yeah, and they're like, "Oh yeah, by the way, that means your dad, who is a soldier, is probably dead."
I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's incredible. Like I'm incredulous over this person's life, which is based on a true story. I'm like, holy crap. This is like one bad thing after another, and it has nothing to do with the nuclear part of what in history we were taught about Japanese World War II history. I didn't know about a lot of this stuff, like to the extent that it's portrayed. And that's why I think this is a beautiful film, and it was really well done because you see the realism where a lot of animes don't get into that. It's dark, but it's dark because it's real.
Well, and that's why I would agree with Roger Ebert. I would call this a war film, and I would call this one of the best and most powerful war films. War is ugly. War, there's just, I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And a lot of war films, at least what I have seen growing up in America, okay, I'll be honest, I haven't seen a lot of international war films, but what I've seen in a lot of growing up in American war films is a lot of heroic battles, movies about Midway and stuff. I mean, dealing with Japan at least, or dealing with, the storming of Normandy and, Saving Private Ryan. And Saving Private Ryan kind of did this to a certain extent, but a lot of the war films either look at the heroic battles, they look at the political maneuvering. Like I said, a lot of what we're taught here in America about Japanese history in the war is, okay, the Battle of like Midway and the 2 droppings of the atomic bomb. And
Right.
You kind of lose the sense a lot of times when you do those things. They make for great summer blockbusters, but you lose the sense of what war really is. It overpowers people's lives, and it is bleak. It is futile. It is absolutely damaging, but it affects the small people, the everyday people. These weren't 2 war heroes. These weren't 2 generals. His father, the teenage boy's father, was a general, or he was an officer in the Navy, but he wasn't a war hero. You don't even know about him. He just doesn't even know what happens to him.
All you get is a picture of him.
Yeah, so it brings the focus back to, hey, what does war actually affect? It affects the people who everyday life is now a struggle. Every day to find food is a struggle. You can't just go to the grocery store. That's what war is like on the people when their countries are at war. Can't find groceries, have to be worried about bomb raids, have to be worried about losing their home, have to lose family members, friends, completely isolated. These 2 children, who I think the oldest one is like 15 and the girl's like 5 years old, something like that is the ages.
Not sure. I just know that he's a teenager. I know that much. Because you don't even realize.
What is it? I'm sorry, Graham. What did you say?
I think he might be 14.
And what's she, like 5 or 6, something like that?
I don't even think she's that.
She's like 4 or 5. Yeah, I think 5? She might be like 4.
4. She actually is voiced in Japanese by a 5-year-old girl.
Yeah, and you can tell, and I think that's because I watched it in the Japanese version. I think that also is what got me. Like, I'm not used to children being portrayed by children, except for in South Park, like you don't see that. And when I say that, I mean Ike, not all the kids, obviously. But the fact that these sad moments are happening, and this little girl is actually voiced by a child, and I think that's what did it for me, because it was just so sad, and I was like, I already know everybody dies, like whatever, I already know what to expect, and I'm gonna be tough, but you hear this little girl, and like the end, I'm not gonna spoil it, but the scene in which she goes was rough, and then I think the scenes following it up, my roommate's like, they're making this sadder than it needs to be right now. And I'm like, you're right.
You shouldn't laugh, because this is such a heavy film.
You laugh because you gotta. Yeah. But like, no, the scenes that follow it are like flashbacks of her and her happiness and her prime and the sweetness and all of his memories of her And you see it across this place that they've been living. You see these little glimpses, these little snapshots of where she was, what she was doing when everything was okay. And I think that's what gets me, because you hear her little giggle and her laugh, and her eyes are just so bright, and she's still got her plump little cheeks. He goes, they just spent 10 minutes making this way sadder than the initial death was. And I'm like, yep, they sure did. Like, oh my God, it was rough.
I mean, but that's how the 14-year-old or like any family member, especially when you're that young, would feel when they lose a sibling. So much of the movie is he's like, this is my responsibility. I'm going to take care of her. And he's trying to be like a tough guy and do his part, be tough like his dad, and countries, do your part for the war, civilians and soldiers. And then it's like, oh, I failed. And then it's like, not only did I fail, I failed hard. My little sister is dead. And then he's like, that's all I can think about is when things weren't crappy.
Imagine that guilt, though. Because
Yeah.
I know it's not his fault, but there's a point where he takes her to a doctor, and he's like, give her a shot, make her better. And he goes, she just needs to, like, be nourished. There's nothing I can do. And by the time he's trying to address the problem, because he's finally able to, it's too late. And just the guilt he has to feel, and you can see it in his face. And I think that's another artistic thing that I didn't bring up, but just the facial expressions, because they're so real. Like, I know Miyazaki's known for his big, bubbly, overwhelming tears, and you don't really see a lot of that here. There's a point where there's a little bit of superfluous tearage happening, but for the most part, it's not like every other Ghibli film where it just looks like there's a water faucet coming out of their eyes, because this is more realistic. This is every tear and every thing that happens with the facial expressions is just so on point. And I guess I appreciated that. Even when the little girl was pouting because she wanted to see her mom, everything was really well done in the terms of the art of the facial expressions.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Kind of going off of their relationship is one of the things I wanted to talk about, was the relationship between that brother and sister, because it's just so strong from the beginning to the end. Everything he's doing is for her. Like, he could care less. He goes, you take this. Like, he would starve if it meant she had food. He would go without. And I don't have siblings, but when you hear about the sacrificial things that the older sibling does for the younger sibling, that's, what you think of. And the whole guilt thing, that's got to be overwhelming. He does his best, and it's just not enough. And that's what's real. It's not ideal. It's not happy fairy tale ending, but that's realistic. his character is just, he's strong, but he's as strong as a 14, 15-year-old can be.
Again, going back, as I think I mentioned at the beginning of the show, this movie is based on a novel written by Kiyuki Nosaka, and I apologize if I mispronounced that name, called... I'm sorry?
Better.
I did better?
They're really good. You're getting better.
Yeah, thank you. See, I told you, I approved. Maybe by the third season, I'll be able to pronounce these names perfectly, like you two. But he wrote a novel called A Grave of Fireflies, and it was written because he blamed himself on losing his little sister. And he wrote it, he said, to try to cope with that loss and try to process it and to come to terms with what happened. So that guilt very much shines through still in this movie as well, in that character when he loses his sister. And I think, to me, was, it's called A Grave of the Fireflies is the name of the movie. And like I said, the book is Grave of the Fireflies is the name of the movie. A Grave of Fireflies is the name of the book. So everything revolves around about fireflies. And there's a scene where Setsuko, did I pronounce that right?
Setsuko. It's the way that the SU sound in Japanese sounds. Just like it's not Sasuke in Naruto, it's Sasuke. So Setsuko.
Setsuko.
Yes.
There you go. See, learn Japanese here. You can all learn along with me out there listening. Setsuko says, "Why do fireflies have to die so soon?" Because it's right after this beautiful scene where, like I said, they kind of are playing in the field with the fireflies. Then she's burying them because that's the kind of movie this movie is.
Too heavy.
Yeah, so she's burying them because they died in the next morning or whatever. But and she said, "Why do fireflies have to die so soon?" And I think it was, because she's a firefly to him, and he's kind of maybe even a firefly to her, in the fact that they bring joy. They're the light in each other's life. They're the only light that each other have in this very bleak warscape, that life that they live. So I think they bring light into each other's life, like the fireflies brought light and joy into it. And they obviously died prematurely. So it's very symbolic of that, the relationship that they have. That's how I interpreted the title. I don't know if anyone else had any different interpretations.
No, yeah, you're right. But also, like, I think it was Graham. I'm laughing because that's how I deal with trauma.
See, now you're making me laugh because I laugh along with people.
Yes. But Graham was like, "The fireflies are bombs." Like, I was like, "Oh my god." I'm pretty sure you said that, like, as we were talking about what we were going to record next last week. You were like, "Yeah, it's funny because the fireflies are bombs," except it's not funny. Like, oh no, it's dark. Do you see the fireflies because it's such a big thing throughout the film, and the fireflies are like a bonding point, and sweet happy moments, but like that directly contrasts with the fireflies up in the sky, which are glowing fire bombs.
I forgot that I had even said that, but yeah, there's this contrast of like, oh, look at these cute flying glowy things, and they bring so much joy, and they're not there for long, and oh, why do they gotta go? And then it's like, oh, here are these glowing things also in the sky coming down, and oh, they go so fast, but they don't bring joy. The contrast between how they affect the circumstances.
Because for those of you not familiar with the movie or Japanese history, the fire bombs that they're using, like Danny said, to burn down these wooden cities, I mean, are literally just like fire. Like they're just fire that they're dropping down on there. So it's literally fire raining from the sky. It's not a piece of, like, what we think of a bomb, where it's like a piece of metal that drops and then explodes. It's literally just fire just coming down. So it does look like fireflies. That's why if you blow up the movie poster or expose the movie poster, which has them in the field with fireflies, you'll see that some of the fireflies are actually these fire bombs, and you'll see that one of the clouds behind them is actually a bomber. So that's why everyone says that the fireflies has a double meaning in this movie.
Yes. Okay. So one of the things that I found interesting is my roommate, who was kind of giving commentary because he's a big World War II history person. He told me this interesting fact that his teacher in high school had taught him that when you looked up in the sky, this is from accounts of the Japanese, they would look up in the sky, and if you saw lines, then you were safe. If you saw glowing lines, then you were safe, because that means the bombs weren't directly above you. If you saw dots that were glowing, then you were screwed, because they're coming straight down. And that's so dark. And thinking about that, from the first scene, he goes, these people are going to die. Like, he was talking about the main characters. He thought that's how they were going to die, because it's just raining down on them. And I think that's the little bit of anime trickery, idealism that is kind of the only thing that's given in this, is those firebombs probably would have taken them out. Like, these are kids, but they didn't for the sake of the story, or just dumb luck. But the fact that they look up and they just see all these dots littering the sky, yeah, it was just, that was intense to me. I was like, that's an interesting fact. But yeah. And speaking of the whole like bombers going by, one of the last scenes in the movie after the war's over, and this kind of speaks to the whole like PTSD thing, is the war's over and he's walking and he hears a plane go by. There's no sirens, but his knee-jerk reaction is to drop to the ground. It's to drop to the ground and huddle down in fear, because he's been doing that for so long that he's terrified. He's like, I've lost everything else. What else are you going to take from me? Like, he just makes himself as small as possible. Even though there's no sirens going off, there's no people screaming in fear, the war is over. And I think the fact that he dies after the war's over is one of the darkest things of this movie. It's not the war itself that gets him. It's that he has nobody because of the war.
19 days after the official surrender?
Right? Yeah.
And the fact that it's done so blasé. Like, at the beginning of the movie, it's just they're at it's set in a train station or a bus station. You just see him, like, slumped against a wall, and he's looking down. I think there's just a couple of other people sitting around who also look kind of shabby. But he's just, like, kind of sitting on the ground, and, like, it's like you can tell he's in his last moments.
Oh, my God.
Just, like, and then I think, like, the workers are like, crap, there's someone dead here. Like, I got clean it up, whatever.
No. What gets me is what one of the other passerbys says. They said the Americans aren't going to want to see that, and that gave me like shivers. I was like, "Holy crap, that's dark!" Because knowing that this is after the war and knowing that they're trying to please the Americans because they've surrendered, that's so dark. Like, oh, they're not going to want to see dead Japanese that are dying. Like, holy crap, that's dark as hell.
Time to shove the mess under your bed. And that's not the same mentality you need to have.
I made myself sad.
The thing that got me in that first scene is when they're just cleaning up. And I can't remember if it was like the jar or like the little can. He had the little can with him. And when they were cleaning up, they just got rid of it. But when the guard picks it up and he's just like, whatever, it's junk. And he throws it out in the field. And then, like, it stirs up some fireflies or whatever, but it's can of snack they like. I can't remember what it was.
You missed an important detail, which is immediately, no, this is intense because I caught it the second time. I had an inkling the first time, but the second time really cemented it for me. When the top pops off the lid of the tin, it's a bone. Mm-hmm. It's part of his sister's ashes, which is what stirs up the fireflies. And the ghost of his sister, and oh my God!
All right, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, what we're talking about is basically the little girl, sorry, Setsuko. Throughout the movie is kind of the brother uses this candy, this tin of candy to kind of try to cheer her up when things get really, really low, while they're trying to survive. And at the very beginning of the movie, as he's dying, he drops the tin, and one of the people, I guess, cleaning up says, "Oh, what's this?" And the other one says, "Don't bother with it, just toss it," which I thought was so symbolic of how these kids were treated, which we'll get into when we talk about the ant in a few minutes. And they toss the tin. He tosses the tin into the field, and then a piece, like Danny said, a piece of basically bone from his sister, which he kept in the tin when he cremated her, falls out, and that's what triggers kind of the ghost thing.
Yeah, and it's like right when the fireflies get stirred up as it hits the ground and like the ashes spill out, and like the fireflies start coming up, and then it's like you immediately see like her ghost right there, kind of like it shook up her ghost or whatever, and it's like
yeah,
and then
like
I think
the fact.
And then he appears right next to her after that,
Yeah,
like his
well,
ghost.
the thing is, as her ghost is kind of awakened, she looks to see her brother in the subway station dying, and she takes a step towards him, and like a hand comes down on her shoulder, and it's her brother, and he's like, "I'm right here," and her face just lights up,
and then they're
this
like,
is
"All right,
before
let's
you
go."
even get to know the characters, and you're already heartbroken.
Yeah, this is just like, we're not spoiling. This is the first 5 minutes. They go to heaven in the first 5 minutes, and then the rest of the movie is all downhill from there.
Record scratch. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
Exactly.
Oh my god. But speaking of situations, I have a big issue with their aunt.
All right, we're going to start with the ant. All right,
we're going to go there because I'm angry. I have anger for this woman. Okay. I need to gather myself because I have a special place of hate for this woman. So these are kids who their mom got messed up by a bomb. Their father is overseas or wherever he's at fighting for the military. And his aunt takes him in. And at first you're like, oh, she's kind of tough. She's a tough lady. Gotcha. But then she starts saying things like, you're just, basically paraphrasing, you're a no good, lazy kid who's not doing anything for our country. My husband's out there, doing things for the country. Even my daughter's out there, the daughter who's noticeably older because she is at least 1.5 feet taller. They're fighting for us. And what are you doing? You just sit around, basically. And the little girl, there's a scene that gets me because there's no compassion that this woman has. This little girl is crying because of all this understandably horrible stuff that's going on. And she's crying in her sleep because she's traumatized. And the aunt just throws open the door. And she's like, can you shut her up? People need to wake up early in this house to go do good for our country. I was shocked. My mouth hung open because this is a child. And this is after the aunt realizes that, they don't have anybody. Oh, everybody's dead now. That. And you notice her demeanor change when she realizes that. She's like, oh, you need to check on your mom. She just seems so worried. And then she goes, oh, she died. Well, that changes things. Why didn't you tell me immediately? He's like, I didn't want. He was protecting his sister. I didn't want to tell Setsuko. I didn't want her to know. And the fact that later on, back to this is kind of what I wanted to get into, when you talked about the Fireflies, the grave of the Fireflies, is Setsuko's burying these Fireflies, and she's like, we got to put them in a grave. Mommy's in a grave too, right? And he's shocked. He's been pretending that, oh, she's just sick. We're going to see her soon, because he's protecting this child. And the shock, he starts sobbing. Our aunt told me. And I'm like, this heartless woman, she can't, oh my God. I'm exasperated. I hate this woman so much. And the fact that she's like, yo, you just cook for yourself because you're greedy. You can just figure out your own issues because you want an extra bite of rice. These are growing children. I was raised, I might have not had the best home situation in the world, but my parents at least were like, if we're hurting on money, the kids eat first. That's the rule. Kids are growing bodies. Kids can't handle being starved out of their nutrition because they need to grow adults, they can deal with the rough stuff a lot longer. So that's it was so shocking to see an adult figure show that cold, callous bitterness, this almost hatred for these children that she's basically calling moochers, and they have nowhere to go. And when they leave, she's like, where are you gonna go? She's all hoity, like, ugh, where are you gonna go? Because if you're not here, where are you gonna go? You don't have anybody, basically. And he's like, we don't know. We're gonna figure it out. And she doesn't even try to stop them. She's like, oh, bye. And my roommate was like, yeah, don't let the door hit you in the ass. Like, because that's basically her demeanor here. And I think...
And that kind of leads to their deaths. So...
Because they had nobody! Because she could care...
Like, they ended up having to live in a cave, and he was having to steal from, like, farmers, and was, like, getting beat up for being caught stealing, because that was their only other option, because they were so unwelcome in their remaining family members' home during wartime after they lost both parents.
She even does worse. I don't think you mentioned this, Danny. They have like they sell the mother's kimono, and she gives them a portion of the rice and then takes some of the rice for herself. And then the very next scene, she's making rice balls for her daughter and her husband. And the girl's crying because she's hungry, and the brother's like, oh, well, don't worry, we'll have rice balls for dinner. She's like, no, you won't, because you're not working, so only my husband and daughter get it. And she's licking her fingers with the rice.
that scene also messed me up, because this is before Setsuko knows that her mom's dead. So she's like, what do you mean you're selling Mama's kimonos? She needs those! And she's like hanging on to them. She's grabbing them with all her tiny little might. She goes, Mama needs these, Mama needs these. And the aunt's like, she doesn't need them anymore, and she sells them, and she's like, here's your portion of it. I'm sorry?
And
I'm so upset. I'm viscerally upset right now.
And it's done. I mean, the aunt's definitely the worst case scenario.
The worst.
The worst. But I mean, there are other people in the film who kind of shut them out or brush them aside under the guise of, well, like, I think there's a merchant or someone they're trying to buy from, and he's like, well, I can't sell you anything. Food's tight here. And
well, this is they go to this merchant, and he goes, do you have any food or any this or that? And he goes, I don't have much, but what I do have, I'll sell you. And then some time goes by, and he goes back to this person, and he goes, hey, like, we don't have anything left. And this guy's just eating. He's just eating in front of them. He goes, yeah, well, I don't have anything to spare. It's hard these days. And he's just by himself sitting on his farm, mind you. He's like, I don't have anything extra. And he's just like chowing down. I mean, understand, like, it doesn't show that he's on a pile of food or anything. So, like, you don't really feel upset at that point. But later on, there's that whole situation where they're starving. And he's like, I need to go. Like, he already knows she's sick. You can see her little bones. She's not doing well. He's like, I need to go get her something nutritious. We're done with our rice. We can't just keep eating soybean paste, basically, And my roommate's like, why didn't they just start fishing? And I was like, that's a really good point.
Well,
but they're 14.
Well, they did. If you don't remember, there's the one scene where they have the fish and the spiked.
Do they? Okay, well.
Picked. I think
it's on a little grill, I think, but it was like tiny little bony fish, I think.
Okay, what I'm saying is they're children.
Yes.
So I'm like, yes, that's why they're not actively fishing with nets and things. But no, when he's like, I need to get nutrition, so he goes to a farm that's overflowing with, like, I want to say, like, young vegetables. They're not quite ripened, but they're nutritious, and he gets caught stealing because there's so many. He's like, oh, he won't notice 2 or 3 missing, and he gets caught. And this guy just beats the ever-living crap out of this child. And he's just trying to help his sister. He's like, I'm sorry, like, this is for my sister. He goes, you even picked the baby beans and the tiny turnips, and and he goes, stealing food is a serious crime in war times. And he just starts beating us. I'm gonna take you to the police. And the next scene, my roommate goes, he brought him back home. He brought him to the cave. Like, I would have gone anywhere but home. I get that this is an adult pressuring a child, but at the same time, I'm like, he brought him back home where his sister was, where she's like getting probably traumatized by seeing her brother get beat to nothing by this adult man. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. Anyway, so he gets taken to the authorities, and they're like, you need to lock him up, throw away the key. He's a demon child, he's stealing. And I love that policeman, because that policeman, you know, after he goes, yeah, you can leave now. And he's like, are you serious? He goes, you know, this is a minor. And he kind of touches his gun. Like, you're an adult that beat up a minor. So he must be 13, because the age of adulthood is 14 or 15 in Japan. I don't know about 1945, but he's a minor. He's not quite an adult. So he's like threatening him, like, you shouldn't have even done this. But yeah, just to make your mind at ease, I got him. You can leave now. So he lets the guy leave. And this poor kid, he's just shaking in fear. He won't meet anybody's eyes. He's just thinking about how he left his sister by herself. He's going to get locked up. Who knows what's going to happen to her, you know? And this guy's like, why don't you drink some water? Like, and he like, I'm pretty sure he takes his hat off as a sign of respect. And he goes, like, do you need a minute? Like, because clearly by his demeanor, he's not going to lock him up. He's not going to arrest him. He just wanted to put that guy's mind at ease so he could get him out of his business. And he essentially lets him go. And he leaves this police station, and his little sister, this little toddler, followed them. Even in her weakened, tiny state, she followed them to the police station, and she's just sobbing because she's so worried. But the good character is like the police officer.
Well, there were some, like even that beginning scene when he's at the train station dying. I think there's one woman or man, there's one person that does put like a rice ball next to him.
Yeah, but he's so weak he can't. So weak, it's too late by that point. But then so many other people are like you said, oh, well, the Americans won't want to see this, and you know, this is so disgraceful. Yeah, disgusting. Yeah. And they walk around and everything like that. So there's so much in the community that does brush them aside, and it's done so much under the guise of patriotism and community. Oh, well, we're doing this for our community, the country, and the war effort. And again, I don't know how much of that was part of Japanese, because I know there was a lot of, patriotism and loyalty to the emperor. The emperor was considered a god before the emperor surrendered. So, I don't know how much of that was part of their culture. Graham, maybe you could speak to that. But I found that such a stark contrast to this patriotism and community, but then so many people just brushing members of their community and just trying to hoard the food for themselves. I know they tried to make a live action version of this movie that justified the Anne a little bit as to the fact that she was a nice woman that and then kind of got hardened by war times. And kind really?
Of, they tried to justify her, that she got, I don't know if it's true or not, but I mean, that's what they tried to excuse, that she was a nice woman who just got hardened by the travesties.
I feel like that's the lady's family that like later on was like, you wrote this about our family? I gotta make something that makes sense of this. Like, I feel like that's a reply almost to the film directly.
It may be, because she definitely does not come across in any redeemable quality in the movie.
I don't care how she comes across. What she did was despicable and resulted in these children's deaths, and I will never forgive her for it, I'm going to say.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
I mean, I was struck, though, by, like I said, that division. Not only this heartwarming story of the children, obviously, which, like you said, was so sad. That scene that you talk about after the police station is just like, that's like, it's just such a, like, oh my God, like how much these two depend on each other just got me, even from my own personal experiences when growing up with my brother. But I was also, the other theme was that these children was just so shut out by this community that tried to say, well, we're so patriotic and we're so much a part of this country and community, and yet so selfish. And so I don't want to be bothered by them. Like I said, I don't know if that spoke any to Japanese culture and history at that time, but I was so taken aback by that, and it stuck out to me so much.
Especially in World War II, like if you think about the kamikaze pilots, where it's like you're giving your life for the greater good, for the sake of the empire and the emperor himself. It was like, you're going to do your part somehow. If you die, well, you did it for a good reason. I remember reading in some books about World War II back when I was in middle school. I think around the time I actually watched this movie, when I was like 12 or 13. That I read something that civilians were trained for, like, if they were invaded, like, on land, that the civilians were combat ready with, like, makeshift, like, spears and stuff like that, where it's like, all right, last stand, here we go. Or it's like, all right, Grandma, come on, get your spear ready.
Get your cane with the sharpened end.
I've been waiting for this. Yeah, that, and the movie touches on this more, where even, what's his name, the main boy, I keep blanking.
Seika?
He's very patriotic too. Like when he finds out that Japan surrendered, he's like, "What?" Like not
he's
only
angry, yeah.
Yeah, he's not shocked, or he's just as shocked as that the war is over and that they lost, but he's more upset that Japan surrendered. He's like, "We can't do that. We can't just give up like that. We gave up. What? We lost?"
He says, "Oh, it was all for nothing," like because he realizes his dad died, obviously, and that now it's all for nothing. Which I thought, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, again, that spoke to kind of probably the Japanese mindset of that generation that went through all this suffering and then lost the war and felt that they were the empire that was going to show the way for the East. I mean, I know they were part of the Axis powers. Putting that aside from, again, the real person on the ground standpoint of a normal everyday citizen, that's got to be a devastating blow that I just went through all the suffering for nothing.
Especially a child.
Right.
Especially a child that has no say in their country. They can't even vote. Like I don't know how the politics in Japan works. I don't think they vote, but I just think
time since the emperor.
Yeah, exactly. So,
right.
Yeah, the monarchy and all that, but they have no say-so, and they're essentially just innocents. That's what I was kind of getting to earlier, the fact that the bombs were dropped on the innocents, and not even on naval bases or anything like that. That's it's like hitting them where it hurts, and I think that's so dark.
And the fact that Japan didn't surrender, and then the bomb was dropped, and then they're like, what about now? And the emperor's like, nope. And they did it again. He's speaking on behalf of the people who it's like he's speaking for people who don't have a say in it, and they pay the consequences for their failure to surrender.
Okay, but keep in mind something that I actually had I paused the movie so me and my roommate could have this discussion, is that we actually had looked it up, and I didn't realize, with American education the way it is, I didn't realize that the bombs were dropped 3 days apart. August 6th and August 9th. Little Boy and then Fat Man. And those are the nicknames of the bombs for those that don't know. And the fact that this is an unprecedented situation. This is the first of its kind. And of course, a bomb, we're not going to surrender to a bomb because they didn't realize the long-term effects that it was going to have. Nobody did. Nobody knew the effects of nuclear fallout or anything like that. And I think had anyone had that knowledge, the second the first bomb was dropped, there would have been a surrender. But the fact that nobody knew, there was no prior experience of this, it was just, it's a bomb. It's a big bomb, but it's a bomb. It's fine. Exactly.
And then it's like, oh, cancer, being blind, radiation, being blinded.
Oh my God. Okay, so for those of you who are kind of grossed out easily, don't listen for the next 30 seconds. Okay, so my roommate was actually telling me about how nuclear bombs, even the people that weren't right under them, they would be wearing a plaid shirt and the shirt would melt into their bodies. They would have plaid skin at that point because it was just, it fused, it messed up all the molecules and it fused the fabric to their bodies. And this is just such an like I said, an unprecedented situation. Nobody's seen this type of horror before. So the fact that it doesn't surprise me that they didn't surrender after the first one, because who would? If you didn't know what this was, it was just, that's a bomb. That sucked. Obviously you have this technology, but they don't realize how devastating it was. And that's just, the fact that it's 3 days apart is just wild to me. I feel like the American education system failed us a little bit when it comes to the details, when it comes from not the American point of view. Don't get me wrong, I love my country, but holy there's some dark things that we aren't told. And when you see the other perspective, you see all the pain that was brought from not even the nuclear perspective. You just see the effects of just war. It's overwhelming because I'm an empath and I'm very empathetic and I can kind of see things from multiple points of view, and man, it makes you think.
Yeah, well, that's why I said at the beginning why I think this is such an effective war film, especially for somebody from the West, because I grew up in the West. I grew up in America. So I went through the American educational system. You hear all about World War II. I know I had a substitute teacher when I was in middle school who fought in the Pacific Theater and used to say, hey, you'd even get told how brutal the Japanese were. They would cut bamboo to point and then tie people over it so the bamboo grew up into them because bamboo grows so fast. So you hear about these brutalities that both sides, obviously did, but seeing this movie and just seeing there was also children and their house were burned to the ground and they lost their mother and they starved, and it doesn't matter what side you are. That's what's so brutal about war. It doesn't matter what side you are or what the policies are of your government. If you're caught in war, it's hell. War is hell is a quote of a general from the Civil War. And it's, I think, one of the most effective and succinct quotes that you can ever find about war.
And
war is
kind
hell.
Of relating that to an everyday point of view, nobody wins in a headbutt.
Right. Nobody wins in war. And that's why, going back to Nuclear Bomb, one of my favorite Rush songs, the Manhattan Project, the stanza that goes, search for a weapon that will settle the score, and whoever found it first would be sure to do their worst. They always have before. Because in war, you're going to do the worst of humanity. That's what war is. It is the worst. It is the lowest. It is the most, violent and negative aspects of human nature. It is our passions in the complete dark end of the spectrum. And so when you have that just unleashed large scale like that, it doesn't matter, what side you're on or what the policies are. It is going to be suffering. There's going to be atrocities. There's going to be great loss and death. Yes. And that is why I think, like I said, it is such an effective film. It shows just these two kids. The little girl, Setsuko, right?
Setsuko. There's no H in there, honey.
I thought you said there was an H. Okay. This is why I can barely speak English. And
it's okay.
But she is just the epitome of absolute innocence and purity. Maybe had, like I said, the Americans invaded, she would have picked up a spear with the rest of the Japanese and started charging the
She's
troops.
gonna lift it with her buff arms, or...
But I couldn't really see that happening. I don't know. Maybe they would have.
She was mourning. Okay, she was mourning the death of Fireflies.
Right.
That live, like, I don't know, don't quote me on this, like 24 hours, like flies, and she's like, she's sobbing for them, and she's just heartbroken over these, just like her, kind of paralleled innocents that just lived too short a time. And that's exactly the parallel there. Like, she's an innocent, and she has no say-so in it.
Again, not to get too political here, but I mean, again, the war machine, that's the government, that's your leaders and everything like that. The human heart, again, as we've talked about in other episodes, can get lost when you get into these kind of bureaucratic machines here. And, I think was so shown in this movie because she is so pure and innocent. She is so loving and compassionate. There is so much love between these two siblings, and it is just decimated by this war around them. And again, you're not seeing, and it's not part of it, is the policies of Japanese government, which I'm not saying weren't atrocious during that time period. I'm not saying they were innocent or anything like that, but there were innocent people in that society, and there were innocent people, and there were innocent children, right? There were innocent people on both sides of the war, and they were caught up in the war.
The fact that they were children, but not only did they have to deal with the effects of war, but of I don't even want to say family, people that were supposed to be family rejecting them. And speaking from experience, not the war part, but the whole family thing, I lost my home getting a little personal here, sorry, but losing my home at 12, 13 years old and having family that could take me in, but it would cramp their style. Like, that's a great example. If I didn't thrive, if I didn't, get stronger in the face of all of the chaos, who knows what could have happened? I've heard horror stories of people who've been in positions just like mine, who weren't able to put themselves through college, who weren't able to defend what little they had. And so when you see something like this with that whole rejection of, oh, well, you have other family, don't you, somewhere? And he's like, well, they're not getting back to me, probably because they're not there anymore. Just like Daddy, who hasn't been replying either. I'm noticing a theme here. You're what I've got, and you're rejecting me. The weight of that on top of war, it's really dark, because not only are they innocents, but they're innocents that are basically denied connection and solace from their own family, their own blood.
And like you said earlier, war brings out the worst in everyone. Even the people who aren't doing the fighting at that point, especially in a situation like that, you're just like scrounging for what you have to keep yourself alive. And not everyone is like this, but the fact that it can bring someone to being like, screw my kin who are children, my family, me, we gotta survive, we're taking y'all's rice.
I mean, there are stories of heroic acts and war bringing out the best in people, and there's, war also can bring out the worst in people, and that's the opposite of compassion. I don't know if there's a word for the opposite of compassion, but to me, that would be the opposite of compassion. Selfishness, maybe, yeah. I mean, but that's the dark side of selfishness. I think in one of the past episodes we talked that sometimes it's good to be selfish to be your unique self, but that's the dark side of selfishness when you're like, well, I'm just going to protect my family. I don't care what anyone else is about anyone else.
Right.
So I'm just
I think the heartlessness of selfishness is where it goes wrong,
which we definitely saw demonstrated by the ant.
Mm-hmm.
We usually try to be inspirational and uplifting in these podcasts here, but this movie does not give you much to hold on to.
There's not a lot to work with there, my guy.
Right.
Okay, let me do my thing. So the last scene, there's a lot of dark shit. Like, there's a lot of bad stuff. But the last scene, seeing Seika, I don't know how to pronounce it, but seeing the main character at the top of a hill with his sister looking over the present day Japan, seeing the glowiness, even though it's present day, and I know he's a ghost or whatever, he's a spirit, but seeing how the world has thrived despite the chaos, despite the fact that the world was ending. The world was falling apart in front of him. And sure, it's 60, 70 years later. I guess in that time, probably 30. But seeing it thrive despite the chaos is uplifting in my opinion. The last scene was beautiful because I know he dealt with so much pain and hurt and tragedy and the worst of things, the worst case scenario, but he's still viewing present day as, you don't see inside his brain, but the way everything just looks so glowy and just uplifting, the music even, everything just seems like it's all going to be okay. Even though all this chaos was had, they grew despite that. There's high-rise buildings, no more wooden homes. They've not only survived, but thrived after. And I think that's kind of what I want to take from the idea of war. Because war isn't for no reason. War is to get the best possible outcome, to, at least in my standpoint, is to achieve the best peace for the most people. And I know there's going to be loss in that, and I know it's not pretty, but I think having the future view on it is, this sucks now, but I'm hoping it was not for nothing. Because one of the things he said was that this was all for nothing, but it wasn't. And it's kind of giving us that same, like, even now, it's aged so well. I'm hoping that all of the pain isn't for nothing. I'm hoping not only can we as people survive the challenges that we come across, but thrive despite them. Because I think that is a powerful outlook on it all. Because you do your best, and if you're one of the lucky people who can survive, then you damn well should thrive.
Well said.
I'm not even going to try topping that.
Yeah, I think we're just going to go out on that. So like we said at the top of this episode, this movie was actually, believe it or not, for those of you who have seen either one or both of these movies, it was made in conjunction with My Neighbor Totoro. It was released as a double feature in Japan with My Neighbor Totoro, which this movie was supposed to help My Neighbor Totoro, and instead My Neighbor Totoro became the big one out of these two, and this one kind of got pushed aside because everyone thought it was depressing, I guess. But Danny found the silver lining, so good job. Because it was done as a double feature, even though it's they're both Studio Ghibli movies, we're going to do My Neighbor Totoro next episode. I haven't seen it. I don't know if one of you want to just give a quick rundown of it before we sign off.
My Neighbor Totoro is about a family, a dad, a mom, and two young girls who move out to the countryside because that is where the mom is having to get medical care, and the girls just adapting to this new life and kind of the adventures they go on along the way, like the little forest spirits that they play with, just growing up in this new place and using their imagination, adjusting to this period of their lives.
Yeah, so very different than this movie. It's very different than Grave of the Fireflies. But yeah, so that would be our next episode. We'll be on that one. That will be episode 11. In the meantime, where can our listeners find you?
You can find me at Kittens and Caffeine at Instagram and also on Twitch, which I am trying to be more active on. Trying to play more video games other than like Top Right Center. Trying to play more exciting story-based games like Nier Automata and stuff. We'll see what happens.
And you guys can find me on Twitter at MadShellfish2. I post about usually anime and video games like fighting games and survival horror and stuff like that.
And I am a writer, so you can check out my blog, or I post some short stories and stuff at humanOneNature.blogspot.com, and that's the numeral one, not spelled out. If you would like to join the conversation that we had here tonight, add in anything that maybe we missed, or your own 2 cents, feel free to email us at animindpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you have any suggestions of any movies or series that you want us to cover, you can feel free to also write in with your suggestions to animindpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow our parent company, which is Victims and Villains, over at victimsandvillains.net. There you can find links to their Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube accounts. Victimsandvillains.net also has movie resources, movie reviews, podcasts such as this one, and you can also, most importantly, find their mental health resource library. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep both your mental health and anime on the mind.